Ravi Shankar wrote this autobiography in 1969. It's a very intense and dry account of his life up to that point, sandwiched in between very intense and dry accounts of Indian classical music and how to play the sitar. He did much later write another longer autobiography, which I'm now reading, which is lovely. It's absolutely captivating. But I did find one passage here, which I think you will find. I found it just quite charming. He's talking about, the context is that he's met the Beatles at their request, and they're beginning to take an interest in sitar playing, especially, as we know, George Harrison. And eventually it's agreed that George would actually come to India for a few weeks to work with Ravi. And he comes, he stays in the hotel, and it's discovered where he is. And he writes, "I could not believe it when I saw this mad frenzy of young people, mostly girls from 12 to about 17. I would have believed it in London or Tokyo or New York, but in India? And then I realized that young people in our big cities like Bombay or Delhi are no different from other young people of the world. Some of these girls stood for 8 or 10 hours outside the hotel, screaming at me to send George down and furiously yelling for him. After a few days, I knew the situation was going to get even worse. I couldn't teach, and George couldn't practice with all those young people screaming down in the street. Things reached such a state that we had to call a press conference to explain that George had not come as a Beatle, but as my disciple, and he asked to be left in peace to work on his music with me. Then we went to Kashmir and Benares and a few other places, and spent the rest of his visit in relative quiet. In his lessons, I had George practice all the correct positions of sitting and some of the basic exercises. This was the most that one could do in 6 weeks, considering that a disciple usually spends years learning just these basics. Even so, George came to understand the discipline involved, and since then he has realized how difficult it is to play the sitar, and has said that it would take him 40 years to learn to play it properly. On my subsequent visits to London, I have been able to give him a few more lessons, and I spent more time with him on a visit in early 1967, and then we were able to work a few more days when we were all in Hollywood that summer. Though I know he is very serious and sincere about Indian music, I realize that George is part of a group, that he is a Beatle first, and that his commitment as a Beatle takes much time and energy. We shall see how much of himself he will be able to devote to the sitar."
That's good.